Let's get in the weeds with Pardot Dynamic Content, specifically embedding JavaScript using dynamic content. And Joe Pie Weed. When we're working with dynamic content, we have a default content which is shown for all anonymous visitors, and we have a variation which is anybody that matches, any prospect that matches that value. So when we're wanting to write JavaScript, we want to make sure that we have the default content, and then also a variation that we're confident all known prospects will fall under. So in this case, I picked a score, type score, and then a value of greater than some ridiculously negative number. We should always fall into that, and then this will run against all known prospects in this block, and then anonymous visitors in this block. Sometimes our JavaScript will be the same for both, so we'll actually have the same value in both blocks, and sometimes it will be different. It doesn't look like much when we're looking at the main screen, but if we actually go in and edit this, we will see that we actually do see the variations. So let's start with the variation. This is for our known prospects, and we can see when we go in and edit this, we want to view source, and we can see that we can actually write JavaScript. In this case, this is an example using the Drift chatbot, where if Pardot knows who the prospect is, we're able to use the Drift JavaScript API to call and identify, and then let Drift know, hey, this is who this person is. This is this prospect on the website right now. So Drift doesn't have to ask itself because it's already a known person. This is now irrelevant because Drift has a Pardot integration that makes this not needed anymore, but this is an interesting example. And we just pass in, we can set a variable, a JavaScript variable, and we could just pass in a Pardot merge field value and populate the variables. Sometimes the code will be the exact same, especially if we're not using merge fields, because the default contents for unknown prospects, there's no merge fields to populate. Sometimes it's going to be different. In this case, it was quite different for me. And this was a way of getting Drift. So if it filled out, if somebody filled out the Drift bot and said who they were, Drift was able to tell Pardot and actually set the prospect cookie. This actually didn't work very well, but it was something I was trying. But we can see we can have the JavaScript being written and held inside of the dynamic content block. Another useful aspect of this is if I was to embed this JavaScript on, say, every form, and I have a couple of hundred forms, if I need to change that JavaScript, I got to go through and edit, hundreds of forms, which is very tedious. But if I put the JavaScript inside the dynamic content block, both here and in the variation, and now I go in and just load the dynamic content on the form, like in the thank you text or the footer or wherever the appropriate spot is, and I need to make a change, I can come back and change that JavaScript just in one spot in the dynamic content, and now that change is reflected across all my full forms, which is wonderful. What this would look like on the browser side, so here I could do a view source, and this specific example is actually pulled in by Google Tag Manager, and Google Tag Manager is adding my Pardot tracking code, and it's adding, in this case, a dynamic content block for populating data layer valuables for Google Analytics. And this is really cool. In this case, I don't have any actual values for the Pardot merge fields, so this is pushing an empty value. But if when I filled out this form, and if I was more well known inside Pardot, I could have had some of these values populated. But this is a really cool way of getting sales data. Like if we're using Challenger sales or winning complex sales, we can put some of those sales names for various roles in the sales cycle. We'd actually pull those into Pardot and then push those into Google Analytics under data layer, and we write segmentation based on if they're a buyer, if their personality types, whatever sales language that we're using, and we segment our web traffic that way, which is really, really powerful. We could start seeing, do people who are signing the checks, are they looking at the content we think they ought to be looking at? Or are they looking at something else? And we can validate some of our assumptions, and we can start honing in on content. But it's all written in Pardot Dynamic Content, writing the JavaScript, filling out the variables, JavaScript variables, which is hugely powerful. So this is getting into the weeds with dynamic content, embedding JavaScript, and our friend Joe Pye Weed.